Hi, this is Dr. Tech. This is about question number 2 of the final exam for cisp300 in 2018 fall semester. So, this is the question, and depending on your variation, it can be slightly different. So, the key of this one is there's an array of 7 elements that is supposed to be initialized with your student ID with the leftmost digit being the first element or element 0 because elements start with index 0. So I'm going to trace this code as if I'm doing it on paper. But before I do that, because the screen is wider than it is long, so I can't really see the code once I start coding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a screenshot of the code so this way I can keep it in view at all times. So the trick to do that is to do a screenshot of just that area, kind of like this, and save it as a file. And I'm gonna save this to the temp folder. Yeah, this is cisp300 fxq2, and then I'm gonna reopen it using a text editor, and then we'll make sure that it stays visible the entire time. You can't see what I'm doing right now. I'm just opening up the file with a program. So this is cisp300. There we go. And because I don't want the other window when I'm working on it to hide this, I'm gonna make this always on top so I can see it as I work on the code. And we can always start to try to make this as wide as possible. So we'll zoom in maybe just one more time. That may be too much. Yeah, that's too much. Okay, let's zoom back out. Okay. Alright, I think this will work. Alright. So the first thing we need to do is to figure out what columns we're going to need in this case. So let's go ahead and work out the number of columns, or what kind of columns we'll need to get this to work. Starting from the left, the usual columns that we use are, we definitely have to include line number as a column. We'll need one for each global variable. This particular program has no subroutine, so everything is global. So we have I, we have X, and then we have also array A, which has 7 elements. So there are several ways to do it. You can, let me undo this. So you can use the notation of A bracket 0, bracket 1, bracket 2, bracket 3, bracket 4, bracket 5, and bracket 6. So I can do it this way. And then the leftmost digit is the first element. So in my case, it is 0, 0, 0, 6, 8, 8, 7. That's pre-initialized. So the precondition of this entire thing is we don't know anything about I, we don't know anything about X, but we know the values of all of the elements in A. Okay. So now that we have the algorithms appearing on the right hand side, it's actually very easy to keep track of what we're doing here. So on line 172, I gets initialized to 0. On line 173, X gets initialized to 0. Oops, I forgot one thing. I forgot about the comments column. On line 74, we evaluate the condition. I is less than bar A bar is true. So we get into the loop on line 75. It is the beginning of a conditional statement. This is about modulus. it's the remainder of a division, and I is 0 at this point. So we are looking at 0 divided by 2, which has a remainder of 0. So the condition is true. So I'm going to indicate it here. So a bracket I mod 2 equals to 0 is true. So we go into the then statement, which is on line 176. We're adding the value of that particular element, which is a bracket 0 to x, but because it is also 0, 0 plus 0 is 0. Then we move on to line 180. So this is where I would I'll talk about how I will grade it or how I assign points later. But this is a key element is when we are done with the conditional statement, we each one branch of the conditional statement, we have to know that it's time to get out of the entire conditional statement. On line 180, we increment I to 1, then we get back to line 74. I is less than bar a bar is true. On line 75, a bracket I, which is a bracket 1 this time, but it also has a value of 0. Mod 2 equals to 0 is still true. Line 76, we add 0 to 0, which is still 0. Line 180, increment I to 2, back to line 174. I is less than bar a bar is true. On line 175, a bracket I, which is a bracket 2 this time because I has a value of 2, but that also has a value of 0, and the remainder of 0 divided by 2 is 0. So this is still true. We move on to line 176. Once again, we add 0 to 0. And then on line 180, we add 1 to I. I is now 3. We go back to line 174. I is less than bar a bar is true. On line 75, a bracket I, which is a bracket 3 this time, is 6. 6 divided by 2 has a remainder of 0. So a bracket I mod 2 equals to 0 is true. On line 76, we add 6 to x. So x is now finally non-zero because now it has a value of 6. Then we get back to line 180, which adds 1 to I. I is now 4. Then we get to line 174 again. I is now 4. 4 is less than 7 is true. And you can see it's mostly just tedium at this point. On line 175, we calculate a bracket I, which is 8. The remainder of 8 divided by 2 is 0, is true. On line 76, we add the 8 to 6, so we now got 14. And then on line 180, we add 1 to I. I is now 5. And then on line 174, okay, let's fix that. On line 174, I is 5. 5 is less than 7 is true. On line 175, a bracket I, which is a bracket 5, that is another 8. The remainder of 8 divided by 2 is 0. Then we get to line 76. We add the 8 to 14, which makes it 22. And then we get to line 180. We add 1 to I. I goes to 6. On line 174, I is now 6. 6 is less than bar a bar, which is 7, is true. On line 175, we evaluate a bracket I mod 2. So this is the last digit, which is the only odd number digit of my ID. 7 divided by 2 has a remainder of 1. 1 equals to 0. is false. So this time it will bump us to the else branch, which is on line 178. So on line 78, we subtract the 7 from x. So we now have 15 left. And then we get to line 180. And at line 180, we add 1 to I goes to 7. We get back to line 174. I is now 7. 7 is less than 7 is finally false. We get out of the loop, and then we get to post. Okay. So this is the solution based on my ID. Obviously, based on your ID, it's going to be it can be different. Okay, because it is unlikely that you have the first 6 digits being even number like mine. But it doesn't matter because I will look at your trace based on your ID. So there are several things that I'll be looking for here. Let me use a red color to indicate what I'll be looking for. The first part is kind of, I would lump all of these to the same thing. So these 3 lines are basically the initialization and also the precondition combined into one. They really don't involve a whole lot of logic in the program, but nonetheless, they are important. If somebody misses, the question marks here, it's going to be a minor deduction. Okay, so these are minor deduction, but nonetheless, there is a deduction because they are important. It's important to understand that variables in C and C++ do not start with any particular value, so they're kind of important. And then when we get into the loop, the important part is to understand the structure of a loop. So what makes a loop is it goes back to the beginning based on the condition. So when I check for an understanding of the loop, there are 2 things that I'll be looking for. The first thing is when the condition is true. Oops, okay, wrong color here. So when the condition is true, we move on to the next line. When the condition is true, we move on to the next line. So I'm looking for that transition of a loop. And then the second transition, I'm also going to be looking for when I want to understand whether somebody understands a loop or not, is whether it is transitioning from line 180 back to line 174. So all of these transitions are also important when it comes to a loop. And then the last one is the last transition has to go from the last line of a loop back to the condition, and then when the condition is false, then we exit the loop, and then we end up at post. Oops. There we go. Sorry about that. So this transition is also going to be important when I look for whether somebody understands the structure of a loop or not. And obviously, okay. So that's the second thing I'll be looking for. And then the third thing I'll be looking for is whether somebody has an understanding of how a conditional statement works. So with a conditional statement, I'm going to use another color here. So with a conditional statement, the important part is when the condition is true, we execute the then branch. And then when the condition is false, which is here, we go to the else branch. So the else branch in this particular question is on line 78. And in this case, the true branch or the then branch is on line 76. So I'll be looking for that. And then on top of that is to understand that I gets I plus 1 on line 180 is outside of the conditional statement. So that part is not conditional at all. So what I'll be looking for is after the then statement, we end up on line 178, line 180. But also after the else branch, we do the same thing here. So after the else branch, we're also supposed to get to I gets I plus 1 on line 180. Okay. And then collectively speaking, I need to look at the value of I and see that it is incremented from 0 all the way up to 7. Okay, so so I understand that overall speaking, the increment of I is done correctly in the loop, and then the effect on X, which, okay, I'm running out of colors here, so I'm gonna use dark blue. Okay, so the update of variable X, which depends on whether a digit is odd or even, is also going to be part of the grade. So so this is how I'm going to grade question number 2. I'll be working on the rubric next. When I get to another question, I'll update and post another video. Thank you for watching. And of course, now I have to go find out where the button is to stop it.